Brr, it's cold outside. Let's make some soup. Hey guys, welcome back to At the Table. We are back in Sampson County today, and we are going to be talking all about Heart Month because February is American Heart Month. So we're going to make one recipe today, which, you know, it's been really cold lately, and this will be a really good one for that cold weather. If we get more snow, there's no telling what is going to come. So this will be a really great one to do. The recipe is for a crock pot. We are going to make it in an Instant Pot today. So I wanted to be able to show you that, how to kind of convert it to an Instant Pot and how you might do that based on what your recipe is. So what we are making is a lasagna soup. This is from, she's a blogger, her name is Aubrey Showencase, and her blog is called Kale Couture. I have made a couple of her recipes before. It is she's one of my favorites to get recipes from, just because her recipes are creative, they're a little bit different, just like a lasagna soup. Something that's a little bit different. Lasagna is delicious, but it takes so much time to make, right? So this is a great way to kind of get that flavor in a different way. So what we are using today, we are, of course, switching this recipe up just a little bit. She called for a ground turkey sausage. I could not find that. And the ground turkey that was available, if I was going to go with just a ground turkey, was the 85% to 15%, so 85% lean. And when we think about that, especially when we're talking about our heart, is that we want to make sure we are choosing those, talked about this a lot, choosing those meats that are going to be lower in that saturated fat. So for this one, since I didn't have turkey that was leaner, I chose a beef that was leaner. It is going to be more expensive. Turkey is going to be a little bit more cheaper. So price point wise, you can compare those two based on what your budget is. But if you can afford the lean ground beef, the 93% lean is a great option. And it's going to be lower in that saturated fat than something like an 85% ground turkey. So remember, it doesn't matter necessarily what the meat is. It matters that amount of fat content, especially when we're talking about our ground meat products. You could even buy a ground pork that is 93%, 95% lean. That would still be an even better option than that 85% ground turkey. So keep that stuff in mind. What we're going to start off with is we're just going to cook our ground beef, and we're going to add a few seasonings to this as well. So I'm going to get our pan here, heat it up a little bit, and we'll start with cutting up an onion, and we have some garlic that we'll chop up as well. So remember, when I chop up our onions, we always cut off one end, but then we keep the end that has our hair. So we always want to keep our hair, right? And I like to cut it in half just because it's easier to work with. And then I go in at those grooves and make those small cuts, watching those fingers as you're doing it. And then that way we can go back the other direction and it will be already diced up. Just remember to watch those fingers. Then if you want it more finely chopped, you can go back through with your knife and chop it up a little bit further. That is, of course, your personal preference on how big you want those onion chunks to be. Now, another great thing that I have been using, because y'all know how I do with onions, I've already got my eyes starting to water, is buying the diced onions that are in the frozen section of the grocery store. So they are pre-cut, pre-chopped diced onions that you can buy frozen, and you can just throw them into any recipe that you're using. They're a little bit more expensive, but If it saves you the hassle of having to chop it and that will help you to eat healthier, you obviously want to kind of weigh those odds. And I'm definitely crying. This one is a strong onion. All right, so I'm gonna go back through and chop it up a little bit further. And then we're gonna add this to our pan. We'll take a quick break really quick, and then we'll come back to get all this in the pan.
Star Communications strives to provide you with the best video services. That's why we invested in cutting-edge video equipment to bring you new features such as Cloud DVR, Restart TV, local video on demand, advanced parental controls, and higher quality reception. Unfortunately, these improvements require some changes, and existing DVR customers will lose their current recordings. Changes will start the middle of January, so please view all your recorded content. We hope you will love the new Star TV.
All right, guys, welcome back. So we have our onions all chopped and added to our pan. I went ahead and started that. So the next thing that we're gonna add is some garlic. Now, she calls for about 2 tablespoons of garlic. To me, that would be about 2 cloves. We're just gonna use 1 clove today. Cut back just a little bit on that. If you wanted to, you could definitely do garlic powder. You probably just would want to, you don't wanna do 2 whole tablespoons of that. You wanna kind of ease off that a little bit. Anytime you cook in an Instant Pot, it's gonna enhance the flavors even more, just because of kind of the mechanism of how it cooks. All the flavors are just really intensified. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well when we get to our broth that we're using. But for garlic, of course, that's gonna be more enhanced as well. If you're a garlic person like me, it won't matter. You can definitely use plenty. If you're using garlic powder, that's gonna be something that you wanna kind of cut back on just a little bit. So we're gonna add that to our onions, and then we'll go ahead and throw our beef in as well. Y'all know I love fresh garlic, more so than that, the kind in the jar that's minced. It just, to me, has better flavor. So I'm just gonna dump this whole thing in, and we'll get it so that it's all mixing together really good. That way our onions are gonna be flavoring our onions and garlic will flavor our meat as well. So this is a really easy recipe. Anytime you are using ground meat that you are adding either to the crock pot or an Instant Pot, you always want to cook that first. So regardless if how long it's gonna be cooking in a crock pot, it's a good idea to cook it just so that you know that it is cooked fully. With your ground meats, because they go through the process where the whole muscle is mixed with the inside muscle, when they grind it together, you wanna make sure that it is heated fully all the way through versus something like a steak. You can cook that, you can have that have a lower internal temperature just because that whole muscle is where more of that bacteria will live versus kind of inside of that muscle. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. But we always like to cook our beef beforehand. So we'll let that cook for just a minute. And a little bit about converting things from something like a crock pot to an Instant Pot. I've seen all kinds of crazy math ways to do this. One thing you want to keep in mind is what you're putting in the Instant Pot. So I've tried this recipe before. I wanted to practice it in an Instant Pot before we did it today. And one thing that I noticed is when I was making it, everything was already cooked except for our noodles. So when I put all this stuff into my Instant Pot, everything's already pre-cooked. So I didn't really need to cook it for a total of 20 minutes. If you were doing this in a crock pot, you would add all of the ingredients and cook it in the crock pot for 7 hours on low or 3 hours on high. In the Instant Pot, because everything's already cooked, we're just basically gonna add our noodles and cook the noodles for 2 minutes. So very short cook time in terms of our Instant Pot compared to or electric pressure cooker compared to your crock pot. So think that, keep that in mind, because when you're doing the crock pot, you add everything but the noodles and let all of that cook through really well, just to help the flavors enhance, because in a crock pot you don't have that kind of locked chamber with the steam that helps to enhance the flavors as it is. So that has really cut down on our cook time drastically for this. I still think there are certain things that have really great flavor just from using a crock pot. This is likely one of those. I have not tried it in a crock pot, but if we were to do it in a crock pot setting, I think it might even enhance the flavors. Well, just because it's sitting for so many hours, sometimes just that allowing it to the flavors to meld together for hours and hours, sometimes it can have just a little bit better flavor, I believe. Quick cooking is gonna be a great option if you are pressed for time, but to me it doesn't necessarily mean that the flavors are gonna be as good as if you did a more slow cook option. So just things to keep in mind as you are making something. If you have the time and you plan ahead to where you could make this in the morning and throw it into the crock pot to have when you get home, you know, that would probably be a great option as well. So what we're gonna do, we'll let this finish cooking because that's just the next step that we have, and then we're gonna add everything into our Instant Pot, and we'll talk a little bit about that in our next segment. So we'll see you guys in just a second.
Just because something may work doesn't mean it's right for your business. Let Star Communications' knowledgeable consultants help you customize a hosted voice system that's right for you. Our dedicated experts work with you to understand your business needs and guide you at every step, from choosing and installing services to ongoing maintenance and support. Contact Star today.
All right, guys, welcome back. So our meat is all done. So what we're gonna do next is just drain this a little bit. Typically, if you're using a leaner cut of meat, then you don't have quite as much grease anyways. So you don't necessarily even always have to drain it. Just base that off of your pan. Sometimes your onions, things like that can also cause excess water, and then that can affect what you're cooking. So make sure that you keep those things in mind as well. So what we are gonna do next, I'm just gonna kind of let that hang out for just a minute and start to drain a little bit. And what we're gonna do next is we're gonna make something that we are gonna be adding towards the end. So we have a little mixture that we're gonna put together of just like butter, flour, and milk. And we're gonna throw all of this into the pot except for the milk. So the thing with anytime you're adding milks, really more so milks than creams, but creams, it just depends on the fat content as well. You wanna be mindful of that when you're using something like an Instant Pot that has high heat, because that can cause it to curdle, which would not be good in your dish. So typically when I have anything that is milk or cheese, we're gonna be adding some cream cheese as well. I will do that after it's done cooking and just let it sit for a minute. Your pot will be plenty hot that if you want to let it sit for, 3 or 4 minutes or so, then that will help to kind of let that all soak up and blend together really well without actually having to physically cook it in there. So just something to keep in mind. So what we're going to start with is we are going to just melt our butter. If I can get that. This is about 2 tablespoons of butter. So one thing you want to be mindful of when we are talking about our heart health is that butter absolutely does have that saturated fat. So you want to use that minimally. It's better to have like olive oil as your oil of choice, just because it is going to be an unsaturated fat. When we're talking about our heart health, the saturated fat is what starts to become solid at room temperature. You can actually leave butter out on your counter and it would be perfectly fine. think it's just we've become accustomed to throwing it into the refrigerator. But food safety wise, you can actually leave butter on the counter and it's perfectly okay. And what happens to butter, of course, is when you start to heat it, it becomes a liquid. So anything that becomes solid at room temperature is you want to think about that inside of your body. It's also not going to break down. It's going to begin to coat those arteries and things like that. So if you're consuming too much of it, there's a lot of other factors that's involved as well. I want to preface that. Your genetics, all of that stuff, how active you are, can also play a role, how much of these things you're eating. But if we want to be mindful of our heart, just keeping that to more of a minimum is best. So that's beginning to melt a little bit. And remember, this is for about 8, this soup actually makes 8 servings. So this makes a lot. So in the grand scheme of things, we are not actually consuming 2 whole tablespoons of butter all at one time. So that's something to also be mindful of. So the next thing that I'm going to add is just 2 tablespoons of flour. And this will kind of help to thicken up your soup just a little bit. So it won't be kind of more of a runny soup, it'll be more of a thick soup. This doesn't take long to heat at all. It's pretty quick, we just want to mix that together really well. So you can see it's already starting to kind of thicken up really nicely into our pot, which is exactly what we are looking for. Hopefully y'all can see that a little bit. All right, and I'm gonna have my handy dandy sous chef grab me some milk because I did not grab that out of the refrigerator. So what we're gonna do next is I'm gonna go ahead and add a little bit of our seasoning. Thank you. And we're gonna add that 2 cups of milk. And this is a 2% milk, so keep that in mind as well when we are buying our milks and dairy-based products. That lower fat option is best. I believe our recipe calls for, is it fat-free milk? We just went ahead and they used almond milk. We like to use dairy milk at my house, so that's why I just went ahead and stuck with that. But definitely a lower fat milk would be the best option in terms of your heart health. So I'll go ahead and chop this up next. Our basil, this is just fresh basil. This will help to give it some extra flavor. If you you can't get access to fresh basil, or maybe it's just not in your price range, then you can definitely use the dried. Just again, keep that to a minimum. All right. And we're just gonna set that milk mixture to the side while our stuff cooks in our Instant Pot. So I'm gonna add our beef and onions to our pot. I can do this gracefully, we will see. Do this. And then we are gonna add 1 can of crushed tomatoes, one of the large cans. So this is about a 28 ounce. When you are buying canned items, best thing is to look for that no salt added. If you can't find it, just be mindful how much sodium you are adding to the rest of your dish. So we'll throw all of that in there. And then we need to add, I'm gonna do 4 cups of this beef broth, and I did get the lower sodium option. So again, kind of balancing that out. If we've got a little bit more sodium in our canned tomatoes, we have less sodium in our broth. And when you are using an Instant Pot, like I said, the flavors can get really, really strong. So our recipe actually calls for 6 cups of broth. We are just gonna do the 4 cups, which is 1 container of broth and 2 cups of water. And that can be discarded. Then we're gonna add 2 tablespoons of Italian seasoning for flavor. And then our basil. And then the last thing that we will add is our noodles. Now you can do any type of noodles for this. I have done just the whole grain rotini before. You can do elbow noodles, anything that you have, or you can use the lasagna noodles. We're just gonna break these up. So whatever you have in your fridge is fine, or your pantry, I'm sorry. So I'm just gonna break these kind of into smaller pieces. Ooh. They are kind of hard to break that many at one time. And it doesn't have to be perfect how you break them. But I'm just gonna use this whole box because that will be about the amount that we need. All right, so I'll finish doing this. We will see you guys back in just a second to finish all this up.
Let's get out of here.
Protect what matters most in your life with security from Star Communications.
All right, guys, welcome back. So our lasagna soup is all done in the Instant Pot. I'm gonna go ahead and vent this. While it's venting, I'll explain some of this stuff to you. So what we did was we pressed the pressure cook button and we cooked it for only 2 minutes. Now, you have to think the cook time is gonna be longer than that 2 minutes. So it has to come to pressure, and that will take some time as well. And then it has to, it's gonna do a natural release. So what natural release means is that you let it just naturally come out for 5 minutes. So we did a 2-minute cook time and a 5-minute natural release. After that 5 minutes, we're doing what we're doing now, which is venting that. So you go from the sealing setting to the venting setting, and you see the steam that was in the pot is now coming out. So that's your difference between there's a natural release and a quick release. Quick release is quickly releasing that steam. Natural release is keeping it on the sealing setting, and it will just naturally begin to kind of float out of these little holes at the top very, very slowly. So that would be a longer time. Anything that needs a little bit longer to cook, but not necessarily process. So with your pasta, one thing we also did was inside of your pot, you have a line that says half full or full. There's a line that says you don't need to go past this. When you're doing pasta, because it expands, you don't actually want to go past the half full line. So make sure that when you're doing that, you're keeping an eye on that. I believe this is maybe a 6 or an 8 quart Instant Pot. So we didn't have that problem, but if you have a smaller Instant Pot, you may have to cut down on your size of your recipe, like drastically cut down on that so that it doesn't go over that line. But remember, you can do this whole thing in a crock pot. If you don't even have an electric pressure cooker, you can easily do this recipe in a crock pot as well. So those are some of our options. This is almost done. We'll let that finish in just a second. We've got our milk, butter, and flour mixture here that we are gonna add. Once that is completely done venting, we'll add all of this to it, along with some cream cheese. Now in our recipe, it also gives the option to use ricotta cheese if you would like to do that instead. I think ricotta would give it really, really great flavor. I have tried it with just the cream cheese, and it was good. I feel like it needed a little bit more salt and pepper or Italian seasoning, just add a little bit extra of that. So you can either do cream cheese. If you're choosing a cream cheese, then you want to make sure you're choosing a lower fat option. So either getting that, I cannot say the word, but the Neufchâtel cheese, or choosing one that just says low fat, if you can find that. So that would be just better just because of that saturated fat content would be a little bit lower. Again, thinking about that heart health. Now, ricotta cheese doesn't typically come in a lower fat option, I believe. So keep that in mind. Maybe use just a little bit less if you're trying to be a little bit more heart conscious of what you are using. Now, the other thing that we've talked a lot about is sodium and trying to reduce some of that sodium that we are adding. Our sodium intake of going over the recommended amount is not necessarily because of us adding salt at the table. It tends to be from the foods that we're using that already have a lot of sodium. So whether it's just processed foods or tomato sauce tends to have a good amount of sodium, things like that. So trying to cut back on that and then add your own salt for flavor is going to be a better option. The reason why we want to be careful of our sodium intake is because that can definitely affect our blood pressure, which can definitely affect our heart health. So it puts more pressure on your heart to pump and function the way it's supposed to. So keep that in mind as well when we're talking about our heart health. What we want to keep in mind is definitely that saturated fat content and that sodium intake. So those two are big. This is almost done. You will know it's done once there is a little red button up here that it pops up when it is come to pressure, and then it actually pops back down when it is done. There's no more pressure in the pot. So it actually just popped down. You might have even heard the click. And then if you twist it, you should be able to twist it very easily to open it up. There's a lot of steam, so make sure you keep that your face away from the steam so that you do not burn yourself. So we're just gonna mix all of this up. Hopefully you guys can see that pasta is cooked really well. Looks good, looks beautiful. It smells delicious. So the last thing we're gonna do is add our milk mixture. As you can see, this is still very, very hot. So like I said, it is gonna cook, kind of cook it a little bit more so that it will begin to thicken up. Especially once it cools, it will thicken up even further. This is one of those recipes that's definitely better the next day. So it's a great one to make a big batch of and then have it for the week or the weekend, especially if it's gonna be a cold weekend when you just don't wanna leave your house. So we add our cream cheese and you just kinda wanna let that melt, press it maybe against the sides to the bottom and begin to kinda let that break up into your dish. And that's it. This is a super easy recipe, as you can see. Took me a little bit longer just because I was talking to you guys about it. But if you're making this at home, it should be very quick, very easy, and it's still a very healthy dish that you can make for your family. You could add spinach or things like that to it to even beef up some of the vegetables. So, hope you try this at home. Remember to focus on cutting down some of that saturated fat, that sodium, to make sure we're taking care of that heart and be good to your heart this month. See y'all next time.